Hello, and thank you very much for tuning in to the podcast series by the New Silk Road Project. I'm your host today, Charles Stevens, the founder of the New Silk Road Project. This series is dedicated to understanding and raising awareness of one of the most important development strategies of the 21st century, China's Belt and Road Initiative. The centerpiece of the New Silk Road Project, an initiative supported by Jeep, CSIS, Magellan Capital, the University of St Andrews and Shira, was to travel the course of the Silk Road economic belt from London to Yiwu in eastern China, interviewing the key actors and academics along its course. We will have to apologise in advance for some of the tangential moments in this podcast series, and also the variable quality of audio footage. We do hope this series sheds important light into China's growing global presence and the significant changes taking place across Eurasia. Daniyar Kosnazarov is the co-founder of the Sinopsis Center for Chinese and Central Asian Studies and an analyst at Naxos University in Almaty. It was here, after driving from Bishkek in Kyrgyzstan, that we met him over coffee and talked about his research. He is a researcher on Chinese soft power in Kazakhstan, looking at the links affecting Russia's presence and looking at the interaction between these two actors in the region. As he wisely said, economically, definitely China is here and its presence will grow, but it does not necessarily diminish the Russian political influence. We very much enjoyed our conversation with him.
My name is Daniyar Kosnazarov, and currently I'm the editor-in-chief of the STEP online magazine. But before that, I had worked as the analyst in various think tanks, private and governmental, here in Kazakhstan. And I had also, did a research on China, and particularly Chinese soft power here in Kazakhstan and Central Asia.
Well, getting straight into soft power then, how is China's increasing influence in the region undermining, and bilateral ties, how is that undermining Russia's more established influence?
Well, economically, definitely China is here and its presence will grow. But it doesn't necessarily mean that Chinese Russian political influence will diminish in some way. But in the longer term perspective, what I see is that Beijing is just waiting and seeing what will happen next. And it hopes that economic leverages will turn into political leverages in the future. But if to look from 2018, Russia is still much more, influential power here in Central Asia.
And you've mentioned in one of your articles to the FT that China seems to provide the economic the economic infrastructure solutions, whereas Russia provides the military support. Do you see this partnership as something that can endure in the long run?
Well, I think this bargain is still continuing, and what Russia is doing is capitalizing on its real battlefield experience in Syria, and it wants to sell this experience to Chinese partners as well. Not as a direct military power who will secure the interests of Chinese investors here in Central Asia, but maybe as some kind of private security companies. So I think this scenario is viable in the future.
And of course, Central Asia has had, in the last couple of years, a reasonably unstable security situation, may that be with the Bishkek bombings or internal problems. How has that affected sort of China's presence in the region?
Well, my discussions with Chinese experts and some of the bureaucrats during these the bombings and other issues, they were really shocked. And what were they asking is that, well, we are pouring so much money and people still don't accept us, and still there's a lot of xenophobia and prejudice against us. So many of them were still shocked, and I think they're trying to reconfigure and rethink their attitudes here in Kazakhstan, in Central Asia, and pushing and giving much more money into public diplomacy and cultural diplomacy and this kind of stuff. Yeah.
Do you feel then that, given this emphasis from the Chinese on money, that they need to reorientate their focus away from a sort of neoliberal project towards cultural and educational ties, and what would be the best way of endearing trust and a strong long-term relationship in this region?
Well, the specifics of Central Asia is that if you have very good agreements with the government and government elites and political elites, so you doesn't need to care too much about what people say. And this system, this mechanism had worked for many years, for 2 decades. But now when the world is changing and people want to be part of the, many government solutions and many government initiatives, it wants to directly affect the solutions of the government and the decisions of the government. So what I see is that this old mechanism of interaction of China and Kazakhstan or other countries is still continuing, and people in Beijing still don't know what to do with that change in reality. And I think they're still relying much more on their good ties with the government.
And as Kazakhstan moves up the global value chain and aspires to be a transit corridor, this of course comes with the implication of reliance and interdependence on its neighbours. How do you think that this will affect the regional security situation, focusing on Kazakhstan of course?
Well, the stability of Central Asia, first of all, depends on the internal domestic politics. And here in Kazakhstan, everyone is discussing who will be the next president, and it definitely raises a lot of skepticism and suspicious attitude towards what will going on from many investors. And China is not the exception. They're definitely concerned about the political risks of doing investments here, and what they want is the stability and continuity. And Kazakhstan's official policy was actually to attract all of these investors and turn them into stakeholders that would be interested in political stability here. So they will invest into a stability rather than destabilization or some kind of other destructive kind of things. So this policy works well with the Chinese. What they want is the stability because of the amount of their investments, and the stability in Central Asia will definitely affect the Xinjiang and other parts of the China, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and relations with the Russia as well. Mm-hmm.
And although you've already touched on this, how does China's transition from an economically focused power to one which is more security orientated, may that be internally but also around its borders, how will that affect its relationship with Kazakhstan?
Well, what I see now is that they're becoming much more vocal and ambitious in terms of, telling what kind of problems we have. They're very concerned with the commitments of our side in completing some of the projects, energy projects, infrastructure projects, and with the ambitions of Xi Jinping and with ambitions of China growing politically and geopolitically, I think we can see in the future much more kind of political pressure. Yes. Mm-hmm. But the basis and the fundamental leverage, what they have is investments, definitely.
And as Xi Jinping highlights, this is a displayed as a win-win partnership. If there's political pressure being exerted from the Chinese side towards you, that there's also with the issues going on in Xinjiang with the Uyghurs, which is fostering resentment here. How do you think that can undermine China's project? I mean, of course, this region is very important for it to become a transit corridor. I mean, do you think that could eventually jeopardize their sort of land-based component of the Belt and Road Initiative, or?
Well, the Kazakh elites and the government are interested in Chinese investments not because it's coming from China, but because it's investors. So since we have some economic problems after 2008 economic crisis and low oil prices, Kazakh government itself is very interested in attracting different investors. And China used this opportunity very good and gave a lot of loans and credits for many companies, state-owned companies, that has been controlled or managed by the government and some of the elites. So looking from this kind of perspectives, Kazakh government will be interested first in doing this. But when it comes to public resentments and a lot of xenophobia still continuing and growing, government could use this as a leverage in the bargain against China.
And can the security concerns in Kazakhstan and also Central Asia be separated from the region's interest in gaining greater independence and also from economic development per se? Can these issues be looked at individually, or do they have to be looked at together?
Well, what I really hope is that Chinese investments will create a synergy between Central Asian states. The more they invest in Kazakhstan and the more we sell our oil through other countries like Kyrgyzstan and Uzbekistan, the more we would be interested in stability in Kyrgyzstan and Uzbekistan. So the more we would be, investing in terms of developing our own relations. And what I see now is that Central Asian states are eager to work with each other because they want to be attractive to Chinese investors and other investors as a whole, not as separate entities. Because when you tell investors that Central Asia is 35 million market or 40-70 million market, it is much more attractive than telling that Kazakhstan is only 60 million people. So hard economic problems that Central Asian states face now pushes us to work together and to portray ourselves as a one entity, as a one region, to preserve the investments, and particularly from China.
What's the advantages of looking at Central Asia distinctly as a region rather than Central Asia being part of the Eurasian Economic Union, or if you could categorise the Belt and Road Initiative as an identity, what would be the advantages of that?
Well, I think it's still very early to say that One Belt, One Road initiative has a value kind of related to value, identity, and this kind of stuff, because China is still a very alien culture to us. And when we compare it to Russian culture and media influence and cultural influence, intellectual influence, they're still much more stronger. But it's really difficult to talk about Eurasian identity as well nowadays, because Central Asian states are becoming much more nation-oriented, much more nationalistic in a positive sense and in a negative sense as well. So it's still really difficult and early to say that we have a separate or a common identity. I think we're still in the process of defining what we are and who we are. Mm-hmm.
And in terms of this growing nationalism, you've written that the stronger the Chinese presence, the stronger the anti-Chinese sentiment. Does this relationship apply equally to all demographics and across Central Asia, or does it have a specific focus?
In 2016, there were land lease law protests against law. And when you look into the sociology of this crowd, there are definitely Kazakh-speaking people that lives in big cities, but that have a rural background, that work in a very middle or low-income kind of spheres, and that are very proud of their own identity and that tries to gain this Kazakh kind of identity. These people, I think their primary kind of core identity is that they don't see an opportunity to do business with China. But when you talk to many businessmen who are much more open-minded, let's say, much more rationalistic and pragmatic, they see many opportunities in opening towards Chinese market. So we see different audiences, and basically what defines their attitude towards China is how they see China as a good opportunity to make money or as an enemy that will steal our jobs. Mm-hmm.
And how do you think this perception and public awareness towards China within Kazakhstan has changed since the inception of BRI around 5 years ago now? And also back to the demographics, how that changes between different groups, may that be journalists, think tankers, political elites?
We don't have recent numbers, but when you look into dynamics, you will see that the Sinophobia is growing, despite the BRI and all the other initiatives. So I conceptualize this as that China is becoming much more visible. And when you interact every day with your counterpart, you will definitely see his problems, and you will definitely see some of the misunderstandings or different attitudes towards many things. So the more we know China closer, the more we are getting alienated.
And looking at a different aspect of security, energy security is being seen as key to the Belt and Road Initiative. How is Kazakhstan helping to achieve this diversification and this security for China?
Well, I think there was a very good opportunity for us when Xi Jinping announced the BRI in 2013. It was a very good time to have a bargain and to say that if you want us to continue to sell the oil and energy and commodities, you would need to invest into a high-tech or some kind of technological issues, technological factories and so on. What I see is that probably we had lost this momentum, and even if we are talking about 51 factories, coming from China, all of them are very old and old-fashioned. So I don't see any opportunity to diversify our economy based on Chinese investments on non-oil sector. Yes. But it's a good thing that we are still selling the energy, because it's the bargain. We can bargain anytime we want, but we lost the power of bargaining much more harsher and stricter. Because in 2013, when Xi Jinping announced this initiative, he wasn't sure how this will work. But when we all jumped and supported him, he was really surprised, I guess. And now we see the evolution of this concept. Initially, it was the economic belt of Silk Road, and he made an emphasis on economics by saying that it's not geopolitics or it's not politics. But now we're talking about BRI. So BRI is not only about economics. And after his last party speech, all of us, woke up with the idea that China would become a geopolitical power as well. So BRI would definitely turn into a geopolitical initiative and project.
And what was the significance of the collapse of the commodity price in Kazakhstan several years ago?
Well, I think we got much more addicted to Chinese investors and Chinese presence and Chinese attention.
Even though you think that, from what you said earlier, that this involvement has lost momentum?
Yeah, I think well, on the one hand, we had knocked the doors first to China, but China wasn't sure how the BRI would work, and there were many questions coming from Beijing first of all. So it was a good opportunity, I think, to make very good proposals coming from our side.
And what do you see as the single greatest challenge to the Belt and Road Initiative in the next 5 years?
I think the viability of these projects in terms of economics, it's still I still have many questions about the revenues and how the local society would benefit from this. And the major problem of these projects is that it is government to government rather than society to society. And many people still don't see any opportunities coming from these projects. even if, I mean, roads had been launched or the pipeline, Central Asia pipeline had been launched, you know, with Turkmenistan and other players in the game, because all of these revenues, particularly from the oil, are going to the government budget rather than ordinary people.
And if you were to summarize the Belt and Road Initiative in one word, what is that word for you?
I think it's opportunities. Yes. But we should be careful with that, and we should think how we could use this opportunity very smartly for our own development.